explore. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this coming here. This is our second episode of Brutally Honest. We're going to explore three topics today: simplification, tolerating, and acceptance, and another concept around acceptance, radical acceptance, from one of my mentors who claims that he claims that word, those two words, radical acceptance. I'm here again with Adrian Furnham. Um, my name is Manny Straley, Dr. Manny Straley. I am a trained clinician that has gone on to the world of measurement psychometrics, focusing on talent and competency modeling, as well as helping organizations put their certification and licensure exams together and maintaining it. I'm going to turn it over to Adrian to introduce himself.
Yes, I'm
Adrian, good
Adrian
morning.
Furnham.
Good afternoon.
I'm a psychologist of many types. I don't know quite what type of psychologist I am. I'm a personality psychologist, an IO psychologist, an economic psychologist. I have too many interests. It's not usually thought as very good to be very wide, but not very deep. But I have a number of interests, which is why Manny and I get on so well and natter on about so many things.
Yes, we I just call it like a tennis. We just kind of volley to each other, and this is what this is really all about. A great conversation about our passions of psychological topics and what people do and how they behave and why they do that. So this concept, well, I want to start off with this concept of simplification. A lot of times in my life, I think I overcomplicate things, and I know from my previous spouses, they would say, "What do you mean? Can you simplify what you're saying?" And some of my good friends always say, "What do you mean? What are you saying? Can you simplify it?" And I can't come to like an equation like a squared, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I can't simplify like Pythagorean did many years ago, but I try to do my best. But what is it really like? What is this? What does it mean to simplify? Does it mean that we can understand each other a lot better? Is it something around understanding? Is it something around making a difficult concept an easy concept, making an easy concept an easier concept? And why does it really matter? So those are some of the questions that I have. And I want to see where Adrian is with what does he think it is, and why does it really matter to what we do as psychologists, to the workforce, to people in relationships? Why does this all matter?
Okay. I think in many ways simplifying is very attractive. It usually means reducing complexity and confusion. So when I've got a good friend who is an admirable psychologist. His name is Robert Hogan, and when he gives talks, he will say things like, "There are essentially four aspects to Freud's theory," or "There are three ways of doing this," and it's in many ways a simplification. It's taking a lot of complexity and reducing it to one or two simple ideas. The problem is there's a difference between simplification and clarification. Clarification is where you take a concept and explain in its mechanism usually. And we're attracted, and I've talked about various people who are attracted to simplification as opposed to clarification. The simplification is, we live in a complex world with all sorts of complex issues. People are complex, and it's not surprising your wife would say to you, well, give me a simple answer. The problem is you can give a simple answer, but it's not always the right answer, or it's not always a useful answer because of complexity. That clarification tries to unpick complexity. It's Occam's razor, who always wants things to be parsimonious. There's another very interesting concept. You want to be as short as possible, as clear as possible, as simple as possible. Unfortunately, when we're dealing with human affairs, they're not like that. They're not always very simple. And you're looking for a simple answer to a complicated problem. I think there are times in which it's useful to simplify, to say, there are five issues, really five issues here, only five issues. And of course, there are more, and of course, they can be split, but there's a time for a sort of simplification. I think in human affairs and in things we're interested in, it's much better to have, if possible, clarification, which is a different process and a much it slows things down a lot. And one reason, getting on to the other topic, which we will, and that's this tolerance and ambiguity. What you often find, and what the personality theorists talk about, are people who have almost a fear of complexity, of things not being, of confusion and so forth. And hence you get black and white thinking. You get people who are right or wrong. And that's very simple. You know, the good guys and the bad guys, the guy who gets on the white horse and charges into the sunset and the bad guy. And there are those who are attracted to this sort of bottom line black and white thinking, which is an intolerance of ambiguity, uncomfortable with uncertainty, uncomfortable with confusion, wanting things to be very simple, which can't be very, very simple. And that's why I think there's such an interesting academic literature going back, in fact, to Franklin Brunswick just after the war, 1946, on this concept of, tolerance of ambiguity. Those people who are uncomfortable with things not being very clear. You can study it in their preference for paintings. Years ago, I did this study on people's liking for paintings, and you can have surrealist art. Now, surrealist art for some people is horrendous because it's very unclear what's being represented. It's very distorted and so forth. And the work of Escher, who rejoices in ambiguity and strangeness. And there are those people who really find that very uncomfortable. They want simple, clear, right, wrong, black, white answers. And I think we all do it sometimes. We want that. But I think it's potentially really rather dangerous because we know it's associated with authoritarianism and dogmatism and so forth, that this type of thinking. And I think the one final point is that lack of clarity is sort of people in the arts world, creative people, rejoice in it. They rejoice in ambiguity. They rejoice in putting things together which don't fit together, which is one of the reasons why there is this association between psychosis and creativity. And the argument is that what people do who are on the spectrum, schizotypal, is they quickly put ideas together which don't fit. They see connections. And this ability to connect makes them very creative. So I think just to summarize what I'm trying to say, there are times at which we need to be able to simplify. And I accept that. But I think it's much more important for us to have, in psychological terms, the ability to clarify processes, which is not necessarily simplification. And we also know there are individual differences in tolerance for for complexity, for ambiguity, for things not being clear. The things aren't very clear. Politics is not very clear. Relationships are not very clear about the meaning of things, the underlying processes. And the question is how we as individuals deal with that, deal with the complexities, whether we call for a simplification which makes it easy but doesn't make it better. And as a clinician, I'm sure you've had a lot of experience of that sort of issue.
Yeah, what's really interesting is, yeah, I had a lot of clinical thoughts firing, and I was like, well, maybe Adrian can make what he just said, simplify it or clarify it. But one of the things that came to my mind was Jay Efron was one of my mentors, a well-known family therapist, and I studied with him for many years as an undergrad and beyond that. And in his book, he would say one of the primary processes of therapy is finding the right question to ask the client so they can have the right response. It's not answering their questions, what they come into, it's clarifying what the problem or the issues are through clarifying the question to get the question more clear. And I always thought that that was interesting. And he's not the first to say this, but that's one of his functions, and it's very kind of behavioral in many ways. That's almost kind of like their underlying fundamental model is to get to the words that make things meaningful and
Mm,
actionable. And I think when we talk about clarification, we can get to that. And I think the process of making things simple is actually using a lot of active listening skills, paraphrasing, summarizing, like you said about Bob Hogan, like there's maybe, you know, three concepts I want to discuss to you. One, two, three. Let me break this down for you. Step one, step two, step three. My students love when I do that. You could see that, oh, now I understand it. Instead of saying, do you know what the concept of the difference is? A Jacques Derrida concept. And they look at me like weird. Oh, you ever see this happen where the light turns red and yellow at the same time? Or if you even have an issue where it's red and green at the same time and you don't know what to do, it's exceedingly rare. And he would say, well, that's a concept of the difference. And the difference has to do with the reality or ontological thing you would do, the rules that follow. And and then we could get more into Wittgenstein and get into like these rules. So what is the rule of simplification? What is the rule of clarification? And I
mm,
think I think with clarification and what Jay Efron was trying to say is that the process of continually refining that question that you began with and constantly asking the meta question, asking the question about the question about the question, gets to a point where you could start clarifying things where the other person can comprehend and take some sort of action, whether it's no action on what you're saying. So it's an interesting
mm,
process, and that's the whole language game thing that in the language forms that Wittgenstein was talking about, and it's really a postmodern kind of concept. And if you look at like what you were talking about, like there's individuals that don't have any tolerance for ambiguity, so they focus on the exclusion of the middles, which is option A or option B, yes or no. Kind of like my 3.5-year-old right now. Do you want this or do you want that? I can't ask him if he wants, what do you want to eat? He'll stare at me. I was like, do you want a banana or do you want grapes? Oh, okay, banana, grapes. Sometimes they'll say both. Um, Sometimes they'll say banana grape, which I sometimes my mind goes, well, what if you could genetically do that and come up with a banana grape, right? So that's where my mind goes. It gets a little bit more
mm.
creative on the psychotic side of things. So I could let that all loose and
The-
get into those sort of conversations. But it's very interesting because it is attractive to simplify. It is attractive to clarify. I think as humans, that's how we move our relationships forward. But at the same time, there's a level that sometimes complicated concepts like I'll be brutally honest, like I lost my wife in June. She was the love of my life, but at the same time, the grieving process is exceedingly complex. I
mm,
can't tell you how to get through it. I can't tell you if you're going through something, a loss, any type of loss. I can't really tell you how to get through it. I could tell you how maybe you could be with that person, and that's even a complicated place to even tell you how to do it. But I think if we constantly clarify and ask questions and summarize things, I might be able to help you a little. But really staying with someone and being in that room with someone, which I think is the most difficult skill, human skill to have, is being present with someone. We talked about this last time is incredibly difficult, and that's an ambiguous kind of state to be in, and that's why we don't have that many mastery skilled relational people out there, even master clinicians or master relationship people, whoever they might be. So there's a lot to it, and I think that's really attractive if you could really simplify things, especially in the business world. There's so many,
mm.
I have a very complicated, I like complicated topics. They keep my interest. So a lot of people will say, well, what do you mean by this language game, Manny? And this is crazy. Or, I was like, can you simplify it? And if I can't simplify it, I have no value the
Yeah.
business person. And that's really another kind of business skill. You might be super smart, but how do you put that in what they need to move their job forward? So I think
Yes.
we don't know. We need to assess other people's needs and then talk to that, even if you're super bright or smart or whatever you are on that spectrum. You just have to come to that person's whatever that their needs are. And I'll stop there. I know I said a lot, so
Hmm.
I'll
No,
send the
a
volley
number
back
of
to you.
things you said, I certainly echo with, students being very attracted to, you say there are four fundamental theories. And I remember years ago teaching a course, and I completely forgot what it was now, but there were four, I said there were four fundamental theories and they were different from one another. And then at the exam, you would have something about the theories. And of course, the not very good students would say there are four fundamental theories. The clever ones would say actually three of the theories are fundamental, but the fourth isn't, or needs to be split. Or actually, there are five fundamental theories. One, I had omitted. And you thought it was that critical thinking that was really impressive that we are attracted to the idea that there are four approaches to this and they take for historical reasons, theoretical reasons, they're different. But the really clever people, or at least the students who did very well, in my view, were the ones who were critical of the simplification, of saying, yeah, it's quite a good way to begin, but actually, it's not that. It's too simple, or in the simplification process is wrong in the sense that one really is a subfactor of another. And it's half academic, it's half philosophical, but sometimes it's actually very important to get to where the issues are. The second thing you said, I mean, about the clarification in the business world, I do consulting as well, quite a lot. And there is a strong need for people, particularly when you're a psychologist, to come in and they want you to say, these are the three things you need to look for, or these are diagnostically, the reason why you've got turnover is this, this, and this. Well, it's true. You're probably right. These factors are three, but they're intertwined with each other. They're complicated by something else, and it's difficult, particularly when you want quick solutions to complex problems. That consultants will offer a simple model, a simple threefold model to quote solve the problem. Well, it might solve it initially, but it can be an oversimplification. And the issue is when you are selling your expertise as a clinician or a consultant, they are buying you and they're buying a complexity. They're buying a simplicity. They say, these are the four issues I think you need to deal with. And they like that. Both clients, all sorts of clients like that because you have identified these three or four or whatever it is issues. Now, I'm not saying one is wrong, but there's sometimes as you quite rightly say, you need to go back to this and say halfway through and say, well, actually, the second one is part of the first, or actually it's not that important. And there's the iteration of these things, particularly where there's money involved or time involved. I want to solve this problem quickly. I want to get better. I want to make more money. Tell me the three things I've got to do. And you get caught up in their world of trying to give that answer, give those simple answers. Not that you're wrong and not that one is being dishonest, but sometimes I think you've got to step back and say to people, actually, it's not as simple as that, or these three are possibly important, or they're intertwined with each other, or something like that. And it's letting them know or encourage them to think of the non-simple answers, of the complexity of all this. And our job is half to cut, try, as you said earlier, ask the right questions, because if you ask the right questions, you're more likely to come up with the right answers. But the answers to so many human problems, so many business problems are very complex and intricate and so forth. And sometimes, you wonder why people believe in magic because they're asking you for magic. Clients ask you for magic. Business people ask you, just do it. Tell me what I got to do and I'll do it. Give me the magic pill. And you've got to say to them, well, I'm very sorry, there isn't a magic pill. I think I can help with these issues. I think I can, you know, understand the issue more clearly, but there isn't a magic pill. There's no simple problem, and there's no simple answer to that simple problem, attractive though that is to discuss. So as a consultant, as a clinician, I'm sure this is a difficult problem to deal with for dealing with your clients.
Yeah, I definitely agree. This sparked something in my mind of many years ago. My best friend was studying physics. I mean, I think I was 19 or 18. I don't know, maybe younger or older, one plus or minus 1 or 2 years. And he said, "You ever hear of fractals?" And I'm like, "What's the fractal?" And he's like, "It's these like really complex geometric shapes and all that, and it requires like such crazy mathematics. It's like every time you see a wave on an ocean and you're sitting on the ocean, it's very complicated. The
Mm,
patterns are very random and dynamic, and I think that's what we're dealing with, with when we deal with people in any, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's a group of people, whether it's a group of people in an organization. And then like from that, I said, you know what? Everything's one divided by zero a lot of times. That's if you want to simplify things because it's undefined. So he thought that was genius. We wrote a little paper on that not too long afterwards, but it never got published or anything like that. It was one of our own like little kind of things that we did. But I come back to that often in my life, like how many things are just one divided by zero. It's undefined and it's very, very difficult to accept that
mm,
as humans. I think, like one of my mentors, Fred Newman and Lois Holtzman, they wrote a book about not knowing. Um,
mm,
I don't know the exact title, but it was very had Wittgenstein and Vygotsky and all these really great thinkers in there. And their conclusion was that just humans, and they were therapists. They founded their own therapy school, social therapy, and one of the difficult things is to teach people to tolerate ambiguity or one divided by zero or things like that. And it led to his concept. He simplified it for the masses. He doesn't like that, but he calls it radical acceptance. um, if we could just radically accept things. And I think like as I evolve, because this is brutally honest, I'm Christian. As I evolve in my Christianity, I see in other religions too, as I read of, there is this notion of radically accepting things, and I think there's a peace and joy in all of that. To say, okay, we don't know what that is, but maybe the Quran or the Bible or the Old Testament or Confucius or Buddhists had it right. And Eastern thoughts, they they love the pinnacle is confusion.
mm.
You know, that's where you evolve the most, and it's this acceptance of that. And I think maybe when you get to your deathbed, you realize that life is really complex, but there's a lot of things that were joyful in life, and also, I mean, I think if you're moving into a healthy way of dying, you reflect on the really good things, like when I'm grieving the loss of my deceased wife, and I really reflect on the hard times we had and the bitterness that we had with each other at times, or the arguments and things like that. I really reflect on those days that we were just really in sync, really happy together. Remember sitting in the Parisian cafes, just drinking coffee, or going on these vacations or these trips. It's just you have these things, and that's not complicated. That doesn't have to be simplified. That those joyous emotions, those positive emotions never have to be, it almost seems like they never have to be simplified. But then you look at the other spectrum of it, when you're lonely, when you're mad, when you're angry, when you're upset, I feel like those you can't really they require more complex kind of processes and things like that because we don't accept them. Like I have a lot of people, and actually, the famous Billy Graham would say that most of his letters are about loneliness. And I have a lot
Mm,
of friends that tell me about loneliness. And I
mm,
said, and I begin with this question, can you find something positive in loneliness? There is a lot of positivity to
mm,
loneliness.
mm,
And then they that's the question. I reframe the question for them because in the US, I don't know about in Europe, but in the US, loneliness is looked at as a negative kind
affliction.
of experience.
Mm,
And and if you look through the history of especially the existentialists and even a lot of the religious founders and leaders of the world, loneliness is something that they embrace. And so I have issues with loneliness. I think most people would, but you have to come to a place where you can find and really ask the question, what's really great about loneliness? And as a clinician, you're constantly reframing the questions like that. Like I find that
mm,
the masters, especially the family therapists, would reframe questions like that. Okay, what
mm,
is wrong with being angry? What is wrong with being
mm,
upset? What is wrong,
mm,
what, and what do you, I mean, you also say, what do you get out of it? There's a lot of different questions to ask, but a lot of times in the US, we don't accept where we are at that moment. And Freud spent a lot of time and spent a lot of time writing about resistance. We're resisting so much things in life, especially ourselves. We're our biggest enemy. So I'll pause there. I think I went on
mm.
several different
Well,
tangents.
reflect on the loneliness and the solitary and being lonely are not the same thing. Not being with
No.
somebody, being solitary doesn't necessarily being lonely. It's interesting your observation about the difference between America and Europe. And this book called Quiet. It's written by a woman who's an introvert, and it's all about the being an introvert and how problematic it is, particularly in America, because introverts are thought to be something wrong with you. In a class, I always say to people, point to the extrovert in the class. And then, you ask them, why are they extroverted? I never ask them to point to the introvert in the class because there's an assumption there's something wrong with being an introverted. And of course, this is nonsense. We have clear explanations for why one is introverted and extroverted, and being and doing things alone or being solitary or on one's own and lonely are not necessarily the same thing. One understanding of lonely would be people who want to be with others, want companionship, and don't have it or are unable to have it, as opposed to just being alone. I'm very extroverted, but I'm very happy on my own for periods of time. I'm an only child of only children. So I learnt being solitary. I learned how to amuse myself. I learned how to stimulate the type of stimulations I like. I've learnt how to deal with that. And that's not, I don't think I ever feel lonely. In the sense that I can access stimulation, or I can access other people. Um, I'm not sure where I'm going with this lonely thing, but it's a very interesting issue. You surprise me with that you feel lonely. Am I misinterpreting the issue that you feel you would like to be with people but aren't, and that's why you feel lonely?
Yeah, I think this I think with loneliness, it's one of those things that like, yes, some days I want to be with somebody, and maybe it's like my mom, or my best friend, the people who make me laugh. Like some days I want to hang out with you and have that wine and talk about, Jacques Derrida or like all these other people who we come across, or the guy that fell down on the street the other day, or something about Macron or Trump or whoever Putin or things like that, or World War II generals or things like that. But some days I want to do that. Some days I don't have a choice. I have to be in my work, getting the work done all alone. So I feel lonely. Some days I want to, now that I'm I have a deceased wife, sometimes I want to go back to those days and relive
Mm,
those sort of
mm,
things. So I think part of it's grieving, but part of it is also, you just want to, I think what I'm yearning for. I think my loneliness is more of a yearning for being with people that make me laugh. I had that with my mom for many, many years, where I would get on a call and my mom was really, she thought really outside of the box, didn't say sometimes the right thing, so she wasn't always appropriate. But that was that type of humor that would make you laugh all the time. So sometimes I yearn for that. Sometimes I yearn for like, I go to men's Bible study every Thursday and I yearn for that. I come out of that feeling like I'm a whole new refreshed person.
mm.
So sometimes you yearn for that. Some days I yearn for like the ultra luxury spa treatment that I had like 3 months ago. So some of these things are experiences I yearn instead of, you know, um, trying to settle my mind at night watching some stupid Netflix show, because some of them are really terribly written. But sometimes I need that. Sometimes I need those dumb shows to just turn off my mind. So that's what I mean by that. Can I easily make friends? Can I easily like go and meet up with a friend? Yes, I can, but that also requires a lot of work to do as well. So
Yes.
it's not like when you're in your 20s, you just go out and you're around your friends and you drink a few and you listen to the local band. That's fun, but that also gets old too. Some days you just want to hang around certain people. And I think it's not having that access to that all the time, you know. And like if I was spoiled as a kid because my mom and I we would make each other laugh all the time. And that's what if there's someone I miss the most, it's her because she would always make me laugh. And when you have that, that's kind she was like the female version of Robin Williams. So
Oh,
like having that
wow.
around all the time is just like you're on a different level. It's kind of a
Mm,
dopamine high. But yeah, I
mm.
mean, in that sense of it,
Well,
yeah, and
I want to bring the conversation back to something because of what I was looking at earlier. The one of the things we know is one of the best predictors of longevity is, of course, your genes and your lifestyle, not smoking and not drinking too much and all the rest of it. But one of the factors quite high up is social interaction. We've known this for many years. It's not a genetic variable, and it's not a physical variable like walking or what. It's interaction with other people. And the quality of your life is often determined by the quality of your friends and your interaction patterns. So I was looking at this, and the question was, personality and longevity. So who lives longer? Now, if this theory is that social interaction, friendship, and so forth is a very powerful factor, then you'd expect extroverts would live longer than introverts, because they have a wider selection of friends. They have a bigger network. And yet, of course, introverts don't have as big a network, but they might have a deeper network. So what's the question? Is it I've got 20 good friends and you've got six, but we use them rather differently. And which is the most important? So there's a complexity. And then the next one is, if then extroverts should live longer, but one of the things we know about extroverts is they're sensation seekers and they take risks. They're much more likely to be involved in accidents. They're much more likely to drink too much or take. And so, on the one hand, you've got the benefit of extroversion giving you social networks, which help you live longer. But on the other hand, you've got a lifestyle which does the opposite. So it was an interesting question, do extroverts live longer than introverts? And the answer is, well, there's a lot of complications in this
yeah.
issue
Mhm.
of friendship formation and extroverts are less likely. Well, are they more likely to be lonely? Possibly, but they will have other ways of resolving that issue quite easily, quite quickly, would be my view. So this is a very it speaks to one of the things we're talking about loneliness, being with other people, and the complexities of what that means and how easy it is to achieve. What sort of people make make good friends easily? And is a good friend easily made? Is it about a shallow or a deep one? And as a clinician, it would be better to have 6 friends I could call upon for a little chat, or 2 I could call upon for something quite serious when, I really do want to talk about something very
Yeah.
important to me and very, very possibly hurtful. Would it be better to have just 1 or 2 people I could do that to than 6 who I could be much more shallow with? It's a dilemma. It's a dilemma. It's an interesting one, though.
Yeah, it's like most things I think in life, they're very complicated. And I think when you become a psychologist, or as one of my bosses would call us, a psychologist.
Seekologist, that's good. I like it.
You're out to sea, right? So yeah, I think you begin to look at the complexities, and it's got a lot of layers, and I think it's very difficult. And then I think that's where, as psychologists, we're always trying to simplify in our writings and whatever, like these patterns that we observe, or these phenomenon that we could write about and simplify. And that's our process of putting those things in a journal or a book. And and uh and there's 4 fundamentals of this and that, and it's really exciting when you write that down and then someone says, well, no, I think there's more to it, or I think there's something going on here, and they're asking the questions, and the questions become that iterative space of
Yes,
clarification.
yes.
And so to me, this goes back to Wittgenstein. It's just this crazy language game. Like, these rules are changing to create different meanings, and these meanings are endless. And it's just this, it's Lyotard's post-modern condition, right? The what's it? The incredulous of towards the meta narrative is, I think, the
Oh,
quote. It's an amazing thing if you break it down. It's like this disbelief in what the common knowledge is, or the common theory, or the common approach is. And it's just interesting that he writes this. It's not that it's just a disbelief. It's not like it's many disbeliefs. It doesn't mean that the current meta narrative is right or wrong. It's just that it's a disbelief towards it. So this assumption making is being challenged. And I think when we ask questions, that's what we do. And asking questions in the Socratic method is, I think, the best definition of critical thinking. I've been on the George Washington University's critical thinking committee for 2 years. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't get, I was more confused after that. There was no simplification of that. And I said, these people is all it is Socratic method here that's going on. It's just critical thinking in the sense that we're constantly asking questions. But we don't, again, like the education system in the US doesn't really, they want to promote it, but they don't. Because the teacher's saying,
yes,
no, 1 plus 1 is 2. And a student says, well, why is that the case?
yes.
Can it be, what if we define 2 as equaling 1, and then 1 plus 2 is 2? So, like, and the teacher will correct that person. Well, you can't do it. That's not how it works. And then later on, you find out that there's imaginary numbers, and you could do these things. And technically, LLMs and Bayesian theory is doing that all day long. So, because it's rewriting the rules, then you're back at Wittgenstein again. And that's why I always tell people that you're always at the precipice of a language game, no matter what. So,
One of the things I always used to say about teachers I admired most was the ones who said, "I don't know. I don't know, but I can find out or give it some thought." And it always impressed me with everybody when again in the clinical area or in the consulting area, they ask you a question and you don't know the answer. You certainly can't give an immediate, simple answer. And I think it takes a more courageous person to say, I don't know. I'll find out, I'll think about it, but I can't give you an answer now. And sometimes you put under pressure to give bland, simple-minded, quick answers to problems which are not like that. And I feel confident now to say I don't know. I think the more you know you don't know,
Mhm.
and you're able to say it. Whereas there was a time when I felt because of one's position, one was obliged to come up with an answer that or I've got these degrees in something or the other. I should know about this. I should be able to give a clear and immediate answer. And I did. And sometimes it was good, right, and sometimes it was wrong, and sometimes it was complex, and sometimes simple. And now I'm able to say, well, frankly, I don't know. I can give it some thought and get back to you. I can look it up, but at this stage, I don't know. And I feel, I think I used to admire and admire them all the more now, people who admit it. They're not trying to, make things more complicated. They simply are pointing out that an immediate simple answer is not available.
Yeah.
To someone, and it's more complicated,
Yeah.
more subtle, more devious sometimes,
Mhm.
and that's a problem.
Yeah, and I think that's very attractive. One, and it's one divided by zero, right?
Yes.
So I think one of the things is you may like this. I think you'll like this a lot. One of the things I started doing, I think maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, is when I interview someone and we bring in interns here and there, and if the potential interns are learning this, they might know it, but I ask the question. So sometimes I fill up a glass of water and I ask them how many milliliters are in this, and I want them to get to say, I don't know. Or I'll say,
Hmm.
you're running an ANOVA. Um, you you want to and undergrads don't know this. You want to run, most undergrads don't know this. You want to do a post hoc analysis.
Yeah.
Of the 50 or more post hoc analysis, which one would you pick and why? You know, and no one's going to be like, well, I never had a student I never had anybody that said, oh, I'm going to pick the Chaffee because it's one of the more conservative ones over the Fisher or something, or the LSD, you know? So, like, and I studied with Barry Cohen in NYU, like Jacob Cohen's nephew. So we went through all the post hoc. I have like 20, he gave us like 20 journal articles on that for us to study. It was a good weekend read, No, just kidding. But I actually was really interested in it. I had a lot of questions for him. But anyhow, um, I would ask those questions, and one time the in-person one where I filled up the glass of water,
Hmm.
the person said there was 352 milliliters. And I went to the interviewing team and I said, I would never hire this person because they don't they think they know it. And I can't work with people who think they know it. I want someone to be honest. And honesty, as you look at Barry Posner's work on leadership, is the highest from a mathematical point of view, or really good research world. That's the biggest trait for a leader. And I want to hire leaders that have that factor. So, it's one of those things that I
Hmm.
find really interesting and I think attractive. And I think, those type of traits like honesty and is something that you could simplify. We know what
That's
honesty
interesting. Yes.
looks like. I mean, there's a lot of deception and social psychology concepts that get in there to make people look like they're very honest and imposter syndrome and things like that. So, but there's questions you could ask, like we do on the MMPI, and we have the acquisition skill on the 16PF, so we could get into those sort of things. And there's other things you could even use. I remember working with a neuropsychologist, and he used a lot of different things to look at malingering and deception kind of things among people, looking at trying to get disabilities, and that was always interesting stuff. But yeah.
I love the glass of water. I must use that. The word I was searching for is not that possibly acceptable, but it's bullshitter, isn't it? It's bullshit. You bull, and of course, bullshit takes you quite a long way in life. In sales and marketing, I think bullshit really helps. But I wouldn't like to work for somebody who was a bullshitter. Um, wouldn't
Well,
trust them.
if they're entertaining, it might be worth it.
Yes, yes, as an entertainment, but not as a
Yeah.
business person, or not as a leader, or not as a
No,
boss.
no. And what's really interesting, many years ago, I asked that question to a lot of the people. I began with like a lot of business people who I knew, like friends who own their dads at own companies. And I was really curious about this question. I said, what percentage of all conversations are BS?
Mm.
And and I asked people in general, like for almost 15, 20 years. And do you know what the average percentage was?
Well over 50.
It was in the 90s. And I'm like, okay, so what, so how often are we our
Mm.
conversations are non-BS, So it's interesting. So I think to enter a lot of relationships, you kind of have to have, I think people think you need to have that kind of BS things, but it's not, I don't think it's constant. Like I think when you're in a organization, you have to get things done. You can't BS around anything.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I always found that really interesting that people would put 90% of all conversation or 95% of all conversations as BS. But then they did that study on lying. Like I think in 10 minutes, you're lying 70% of the time or something like that. I forgot. That was like in the 2000s, a study came out on that. What percentage of the time do we lie? And they were looking at white lies, like lies that don't really affect anybody or anything at the end of the day.
Well,
There's impact.
I like the literature on emotional labor. I would say there are three types of labor. They were being simple. There's physical labor, you dig in the garden. There's intellectual labor, cognitive labor, but there's emotional labor. And emotional labor is what people have to do when they are in the service industry. If you're a waiter or waitress or whatever, then you are a salesperson. You have to do emotional labor. Now, emotional labor is a sort of lying. It's apparent sincerity. You look good in this. Well, I don't. It helps people a lot, and so I think the ability to fabricate and to bullshit in some ways is a skill. It's called
Yeah.
emotional labor. It's a requirement in some jobs that you're able to show emotions you don't feel, to express things you don't feel. And I don't think that's, it's impression management, emotional labor. I don't think it's evil. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think if you're unable to do it, you're not very politically skillful and politically savvy. I don't condemn it, but I think there is a time when one needs to make a distinction between when one is emotionally laboring, as it were, and when you're with somebody and you're having to tell and to confront the truth, have to confront the world as you see it, confront something quite problematic, quite straightforwardly, and not covered up with white lies or flim flam. It's a difference.
Yeah. And again, the context will determine that, and that's where you get
Yes,
all your
yeah,
social and emotional intelligence. And we talked about that last week in the last episode in depth, all that.
that's
So
right.
I want to come to uh, sort of a summary part of our little episode today on simplification, tolerance, and acceptance. What are the three things you want to leave for our whoever's our audience
Cool, blimey, that's I haven't
to
prepared this.
simplify?
Yeah, all right. Clarification is more important than simplification. Number one. Number two is the world is not black and white, good and bad. Uh, there are a lot of ambiguities, and they're not frightening ambiguities. They're worth exploring ambiguities. So being tolerant of ambiguity and uncertainty, I think, is beneficial. I think for people who struggle with that in particular areas, particularly with certain ideologies, political beliefs, religious beliefs, being tolerant is a good thing. And the final one is this issue of accepting that one doesn't know, acceptance of other people, but this idea of being able to say that you don't know the answer to a problem. You can look into it, you can work on it, but I think that's important. So those would be my three summaries to people.
Yeah. So I think my three summaries is um, the first one is to get to clarification is really looking at this iterative process of constantly asking the question. And sometimes it's the same exact question.
Mm,
Many years ago, I had a clinical supervisor that would look at the client and say, "I'm going to ask you this question again, but very differently. What do you think is stopping you from moving forward?"
mm,
And guess what the question before that was? What
exactly
do
the
you
same.
think is stopping you from going forward? Exactly. And I thought that was genius. Dr. Hunt, I'll give you all that credit there. That was a great thing. So sometimes it's asking the same question. Sometimes it's, exploring that question. Like you had asked me, why do you think I'm lonely at times? And it's really a yearning to be with people who are unavailable. So,
Mm,
so I have more clarification over that. I really never really thought of that. I think I thought of that maybe 2 years ago, but I don't really thought of that in depth. I think the second thing is it's okay not to know. The one
yes,
divided by zero.
yes.
Nothing in the world's probably going to change if you don't know something. It's the collective that creates the consensus to have something called reality, in my opinion. That goes back to Maturana, a biologist. The consensus of multiple observers is how he defines reality. I haven't found a better definition of that. So it's okay to not know. It's okay to say you don't know something. It's okay to say, let me get back to you about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Let me think about it. So I think these are some skills we don't teach people in the workforce. And I don't think that's encouraged. One of the things I used to do with my
Hmm.
students on the first day of class is do some improvisation games. One of the improv games we did was get something wrong. So I would
Mm.
say, who was the first president of the United States? And somebody would say Elmo, and I would say, well, why did World War One start? Well, because somebody didn't like Cheerios or so, like the food cornflakes or whatever, like something like a hot dog or something like that. There was no mustard, and that's why it started. So we tried to make it humorous too, but it's okay to get something wrong, and that's the beauty of life. You're constantly trying to get it to right, but to live with wrong, it's okay. And a lot of people who are coming to the end of their lives always tell you that, man, I was just too hard on myself. I should have just enjoyed life a lot more. And I think that's the question we need to focus on a lot more. And I think that's the attractive part. And that's where simplification in life comes, to find the joyous moments in life and reflect on it and enjoy the moment. I think the third thing is really trying to find a way to stay in the moment, to tolerate the moment.
Mm,
All
mm.
the religions teach you that, even the difficult times, to have a deep appreciation for the worst times in your life, because it does make you stronger. So, and I think when you can get to that point of tolerance and radical acceptance, you get to find a place where you could grow and
Yes.
accept and no longer get to the bitterness of things. I think we all experience these negative and positive emotions in life, but I think if you could stay in the moment and have a really good laugh, that's the best. Like having really good laughs. Like I said, my mom would always, she was the female Robin Williams. She would get me to laugh and get almost the whole room to laugh. She was incredible in terms of acting out people and especially the way they would move. She had some really good movements on how they would walk and how she would, if there was somebody who could do personality assessments by walking, she would do that. And she would describe in the process of imitating that person, like how they would be their personality. So it was just really and that's interesting and I think those are my big three takeaways. I'm not sure if you had anything
No, I
else.
have no more to say. I think we should dedicate this program to your mother.
There you go. Here's to mom. She would want everyone to raise their glass of a nice glass of wine and drink and be joyful and keep laughing.
I'm right behind her. It's a bit early in the
Yeah.
afternoon for me, but I would do otherwise. Manny,
Well,
it's
it's
always been a
10 a.m.
pleasure. I
here.
look forward to next time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, audience, for joining us. I hope you got a lot out of it. I know I did. And thank you so much, Adrian, for being here. And we'll join you on episode 3 in about a month. And have a great rest of the week. And thank you again. Bye bye.
Bye.